about a side of politics with your beer? You're looking at a pub in downtown Toronto where the debate was on the menu tonight, and it looked as popular as the drinks. Really? Okay, time to hear from the country's most watched political panel. Chantal's in Ottawa. In fact, she was in the debate room for part of the debate tonight. Allan's in Edmonton, and Andrew is here in Toronto. I want to start off with a sense of whether or not you had a surprising moment when you were watching all this. Was there a surprising moment there for you? Chantal, because you were actually in the room, we'll start with you.
I don't think, no, that I had a really surprising moment, although I have to say that I didn't think that Stephen Harper could keep his message. He's a disciplined man, but I didn't think he could keep his performance so focused for so long under so many angles of attack. And if I had a surprise, it's irrelevant to tonight's debate, and it was that it was probably Gilles Ducep's worst English language debate performance, and he has been off his game in his campaign in Quebec since the beginning. So I found that curious until we see what he does tomorrow night.
You know, your Harper remarks are interesting because even some conservatives will say there's the angry Steve, and if he comes out of the box, it's a real problem for us. And you could see the other leaders trying to provoke the angry Steve, if there really is one there. But you're right, it didn't seem to be happening. Allan, a surprising moment for you?
Well, if there was just one moment, it had to be when Jack Layton turned on his heel and attacked Michael Ignatieff's parliamentary attendance record. I mean, he was like a sucker punch, just stopped everything dead. But the larger cumulative kind of surprise for me was how much Stephen Harper allowed this to become a debate on his record. I mean, he clearly was very comfortable fighting it on that train. I expected him to be more combative, trying to find fault, impracticality, irresponsibility in his opponent's positions. But rather than that, he decided that what he would do is he would just defend the record, and he would try to do it in a cool, calm, prime ministerial way. And if he got through that, mission accomplished.
Andrew?
I think the most critical moment for me was Mr. Ignatieff's inability to gasp out the words of whether the party that gets the most seats should form the government. What he rounded on was, well, they can try to get the confidence of the House. It's constitutionally absolutely accurate, but there's a reason he has not wanted to talk about this, because he wants to keep in reserve the idea that he could defeat the Harper government in the House and assume power after that. He's perfectly entitled to, but there's a certain block of voters that just doesn't sit well with. He's wanted to avoid talking about it, but it's hard not to talk about it when you get into a debate with people who have a vested interest in making you talk about it. I think that moment he's going to regret that moment for a long time.
Well, the Conservative spinners are already out tonight trying to make that point and say they're going to run with it. Can they run with it? Is that something that you can go more than a day or so with?
There is a chunk of voters who will tell pollsters they think the country's on the right track, they think the government's on the wrong track. I think there's a battle there for those voters. What Harper has always wanted to do is to say to those voters, if you want the stuff you like about the economy, etc., you have to stick with me. There's only about 45% of the voters who have any problem at all with a coalition or tripartite government. The problem for the opposition is Harper owns that 45%. They're splitting up the other 55%, and that's the basic arithmetic that's against them.
What do Canadians take away from a night like this? What did they learn? Did they learn anything they didn't know already going into the night? You know, we've heard some of what we call the streeters listening to people who are watching the debate, and you get a sense, it's the same old stuff. It's like watching Question Period. Is that fair? Should they be taking more away from it than that? Allan, first?
Oh, I think absolutely. I think this debate demonstrated that voters have a real choice, that there is a real difference here on some big substantive issues relating to tax cuts, relating to value priorities as they manifest themselves in spending, in terms of law and order, these sorts of things. The difficulty for the opposition is that the difference tends to be Stephen Harper on one side and the other two major parties, arguably three major parties, on the other side. And so that clearly the opposition is going to be splitting their vote along those differences. But I think you're going to see a lot more water cooler conversation among individuals talking about, whether we should have a tax cut, whether we shouldn't have a tax cut, whether we can afford fighter jets at this particular point in time. And I think that, has the potential to make this whole thing start to get a little bit more interesting.
You must inhabit some interesting water coolers. Chantal, what do you make of that?
I didn't think it was like Question Period. I actually thought that all four of them came off a lot better than they do in Question Period. But while it is true that the debate showed that there are choices there, I think if there was a fault in the debate, it was that Michael Ignatieff was good in his critique of the government, but he was rather poor at advancing what makes him a different choice from the Conservatives. And so it became a he, Harper, versus them. And I think that's the dynamics that the Conservative strategy really was hoping for, and that got delivered in part because the emphasis on policy coming from Michael Ignatieff was too weak, and that was probably more like question period.
Anybody want to challenge that?
No, but to be fair to Ignatieff, a big chunk of the Liberal platform is loaded onto this family pack, and there was really only one section of the debate where he could really go to town on that, and that was towards the end of the debate. So he had fewer opportunities, perhaps, to get it in than he might have liked. But yes, he was good on the attack. He had some really great moments, particularly on the parliamentary democracy stuff, where I think the government has a lot of explaining to do, but hard to pivot to being more prime ministerial. And to go back to the policy question, yes, it was hard for him to differentiate himself from Harper, also hard for him to differentiate himself from those other two parties over on the left of the center.
Allan, on Ignatieff?
Yeah. Well, he didn't spend a lot of time selling his own policies, the family pack, but in no small measure, I mean, his policy is a point of departure from the status quo, and I think he did that quite successfully. I think he demonstrated that Canadians have a choice, they have an alternative, that if he became the Prime Minister, that there'd be a decidedly different direction than there is right now under Stephen Harper. And I think on a lot of those planks relating to the priorities in government spendings, I think he's on stronger ground than the Conservatives.
Okay, I've only got a couple of minutes left. Let me bring you back to the question I asked Chris Hall at the top of the broadcast. Did anything happen tonight that in some way changes the equation as we move forward for the final weeks of the campaign? Andrew, you start.
Well, I hate to harp on this, but Ignatieff, I think, has got a problem here. He has been trying to go hard after the NDP vote to pull together that Unite the Left coalition to topple Harper. In the process, I think he's left himself vulnerable on that right flank, and particularly to those voters that he needed to reach to say, I can keep everything the same in policy terms, in terms of the economics, but I'll give you nicer government that isn't, disrespecting Parliament. I don't think he was able to make that case to that audience today, and in fact, I think he may be vulnerable there.
Chantal?
We didn't talk about Jack Layton, but one of your reports showed that people who were watching from outside this place did notice that he was on the set. And I think that is also bad news for Mr. Ignatieff, in the sense that if you're going to try to get the votes on the left, you have to walk over the body of Jack Layton. That didn't really happen tonight. It wasn't the strongest debate performance, but it was strong enough, I believe, Jack Layton's performance, to keep his vote. And to keep NDPers happy with their leader. And I think that will make it really, really difficult for Mr. Ignatieff to break the fundamental problem of his campaign, which has been that the opposition vote is split in three, and the other two third-party leaders are actually well-liked veterans who are experienced and don't make big mistakes.
Well, most people are giving Layton the line of the night on the absentee record of Ignatieff in the House. Allan, you got 30 seconds. How does it change the next couple of weeks?
Well, I think Ignatieff exceeded expectations, mostly because those expectations were so low, but I don't think the biggest change is at the level of leadership. I think the biggest level of the change is in fact at the level of policy, where voters may now think that they have more choice than they had previous to watching this debate.
All right. Good to hear from all of you. Busy night, and all three of you will be back somewhere with us on Thursday night. Allan in Edmonton tonight, Andrew here in Toronto, Chantal in Ottawa.